Welcome everyone. Welcome to the new episode. Today I'm so happy we have a new guest today, Tom Reichert, Global CEO of ERM. So today Tom is going to spend some time with us, talk about the company, talk about the role of sustainability, and of course, last but not least, talk about the excitement of international business. Tom, welcome.
Stephanie, thanks a lot for having me, and welcome everyone who's joining.
Yeah, Tom, you just arrived, right? So yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
Right. So Tom, can you talk a little bit about ERM for the audience who are not familiar with the company? What do you do? What's your role as a global CEO?
Sure, Stephanie. So ERM is a sustainability consulting firm. We've been around for over 50 years, so probably longer than most people have been thinking about sustainability in the first place. We operate in 40 countries, 150 offices, 8,000 people, as I said. And we really work with 70 of the Fortune 100, half of the Fortune 500 on all topics related to sustainability. That is, what's the role of sustainability in my overall strategy? We deal with disclosures. We deal with how do you operationalize sustainability in your procurement, in your marketing, in your product development, all the way down to we help companies buy renewable energy. We help renewable developers, to put out wind farms, solar farms, and we also clean up the mess, of old refineries, old power plants. So all the way from strategy to execution, end to end, that's ERM.
That's awesome. So it's more like consulting company focusing on helping firm problem solving in the sustainability space.
That's exactly right.
So sustainability today is really hot, right? So all the firms are talking about ESG, and there are also different views about what are important within the ESG realm. So in your view, so what are the major challenges and then also opportunities firms face today in the sustainability realm?
You say it right, Stephanie. It's a very exciting time, a very interesting time, and a very complex time. So exactly right, for conversations like this one in the MBA program. Now, when I look at the journey, the North Star of sustainability, which we mainly define as achieving net zero by 2050, is still bright. We need to absolutely get there. But the road to get there is windy, has been windy all along. If you just step a moment back, the journey to get to the Paris Agreement 2015 was not an easy one. It was not the top priority, and then very luckily we got the Paris Agreement, which made the major commitments for the 2050 net zero journey. But ever since, we then built from 2015 to COP22 in Glasgow was really the big COP in which policy, business leaders aligned on we need an integrated agenda, we need to set ambitious targets and get on the journey. And then the last 2 years, it's only been 2022 when we did this, the last 2 years have seen a very complicated geopolitical background, economic background, wars in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and of course inflation, energy security considerations. So many companies have thought hard about how to deal with the sustainability agenda. And what we can clearly see is, companies are quite focused, but they want to figure out how sustainability fits into their strategy and to our organization. So let me give you an example. If you operate a data center company these days, you have to think about energy consumption and energy efficiency, meaning also carbon. You have to think about where you get renewable energy from, because many of your customers want your data center service. If you sell your services to Google or AWS or Microsoft, they want net zero carbon in their supply chain, for it. And you need a water strategy, because the biggest issue when you talk to communities about building a new data center is, are you going to take our water, or what's your net zero water strategy for it? So when you bring strategy together with sustainability in one agenda, then we win. That is when organizations can execute. When it's a totally separate discussion to what a company actually does, then it's much more difficult, and we actually haven't made that much progress on this. So I'm actually quite excited where the journey is going now.
Right. So I think on the one hand, we all agree those issues are important, right? As you said, Paris Agreement, net zero, and then UN's sustainability goals, right? So mapped out all the goals we need to achieve. So a statistic also shows like 2/3 of employees actually care what their company stand in sustainability. and about 2/3 of the customers actually care what the company's products and service stand in sustainability, right? So now it's really what can firm do? So you map out all the challenges, right? So and of course, sustainability is really big umbrella. So within each something you talk about, like renewable energy and then waste management, right? And maybe like resale, recycling, right? In many industries. So among all the things, are there any like segments you feel like is more interesting, exciting, but has more actionable strategies for firms?
Yes. Well, as you say that, there's a wide range of topics that we have to deal with. We know that a lot of the sustainability conversations in most of our minds starts with carbon, right? But when you look at the 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, they cover water, human rights, nature, they go across a broad range. And we should not forget, just because we start talking about carbon, these other topics have to be dealt with at some point, and you just raised a number of them, Stephanie. Now, the way I think about that is, the answer is actually specific for every company. And I think that's a very important part of the journey. It's not like everybody does the same. For a data center company, as I just described, will have a different answer than a consumer goods company, what matters for them, in their journey, or a bank, for that. So I think it's very, very important that, like normal strategy development, a company goes down to how do we compete? What makes us differentiated? And where can we use sustainability to create competitive advantage? Meaning, when we have products with more sustainable product, so take some of the clothing retail manufacturers, a lot of movement is we have recycled products in there. Natura in Brazil has been a market leader for that part. You need a customer segment that cares about it, and then you can differentiate yourself onto that part. Other parts is, plastic waste is becoming a huge, huge topic, given how much we pour into oceans and landfills. Companies that produce plastic have to think about, how much reusable plastic they do and what happens at the end of usage with it. So I think very strongly companies have to figure out where the unique part of their strategy is and embrace that. And then we all have to push that doesn't become a lower end agenda, it becomes a critical agenda. But this integration into strategy, and therefore then also how you execute in the company, is the key piece.
That's so interesting. I think you mentioned about, on the one hand, this is a grand challenge all the firms need to embrace in their strategy. On the other hand, you want to stand out, right? So you want to differentiate so that you can stand out from your competitor. So almost like this optimal distinctiveness, what we talk about.
That's right. You've got to find your spot on a journey with a very high commitment. I mean, most companies, 2/3, 3/4 of the companies have some form of commitment where they want to go. And I personally believe is when companies get more comfortable how they execute and how they see then returns and reactions in the market, the bolder they will get, in the space, for it, which puts us back to a more aggressive and more promising pathway to 2050.
Right. So you mentioned execution a couple of times.
Yes.
So which is really challenging in real daily life, right? So we can give them a lot of potential strategic pathway, but in terms of execution, that's a really different story. So do you see in your role, do you see any of the typical pitfalls firms make when executing strategies in sustainability?
Look, you speak exactly right. We believe at ERM that the majority is now not anymore about setting lofty targets. It's about getting the job done. And getting the job done, I think a lot of the general change management principles in an organization, come to bear. That's why I'm actually very happy that the sustainability agenda moves into the core of the business. And procurement teams think about how to responsibly source. Or product development teams think about what materials to use. Companies know how to deal with that. Yes, it has typical execution flaws, but it also has a lot of experience, that companies have through digital transformations, restructurings, and so on. And so we at ERM are fully focused now on helping companies to operationalize. And what does that actually mean? I mean, there's a bit of commonality. Every company will have to think about energy efficiency. How much energy are we using? Now, the good thing is that saves money and it saves carbon. Every company will have to think about whether they can and should, source renewable energy. We can help companies source renewable energy. It's different to what you usually get from your utility, when you buy it. You have to think about investments into your physical infrastructure. When you run a whole set of manufacturing sites, you have to look at how old is your HVAC? What's the consumption? Should I replace it? Those are the types of things that we're very engaged on. And then the other part is training and education. So much of that will be, like in so many other topics, the time that we spend with our teams, our staff, to make them aware how they can think about sustainability in their day-to-day activities. Use different recycling bins, don't just throw things away, turn electricity off, like the light, when they leave the hall and so on. And that will not just be relevant in the job, it will also carry into their personal lives. And at the end of the day, it's a very major societal change exercise that we have in front of us. And so the more we in companies can work to train people, educate them, make them aware, the faster we're going to make progress.
Yeah, I hear a lot of things you mentioned really talking about the processes, right? So processes within the firm,
Yes.
how we make them more efficient. And maybe some of the sustainability are more tied to their core competencies or their core products, which in our academic term we call it material sustainability practices initiatives, while others maybe just more help the process, make it more efficient. Yeah. So you also mentioned data a couple of times. So therefore, I have to ask you this question. What's the role of Gen AI? Will Gen AI help firms dealing with sustainability and then figure out more opportunities? What's your view about Gen AI?
I think we're facing in the world probably three major themes that have to come together. One is clearly our sustainability conversation that we're talking about now. The second one is, can I call that generally digital transformation? I want to go a bit broader than Gen AI. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And the third piece is all the geopolitical conversations that we have and what that actually means for companies, supply chains, their product sourcing, and all those types of topics. So now let's talk about sustainability and the digital side. They have to come together very, very closely. And why am I saying that? First of all, when we do things at scale, we need technology enablement behind it. And these will be types of things like, I need to understand what my baseline is, and that is data. What am I consuming in energy? What happens where in my production? I need to figure out how to monitor things in food and ag. We are flying drones over big fields to figure out what water consumption is needed, or if fertilizer or other supplements are needed. So there's a whole set of technology answers in that space, which have first to do with transparency, but then, of course, analytics, Gen AI will be elements on what to do with this data and how to make decisions around that. The other part that I think is going to be very, very key is to engage just the total technology ecosystem to accelerate our change. And for two reasons. First of all, technology companies over the last decades have shown us how creative and innovative they can be, and we need innovative solutions. But the other part comes back to my data center point is technology companies are some of the largest consumers of energy, and it will only accelerate on the back of Gen AI. So we need them as responsible stakeholders to help themselves and us manage through that energy consumption and do it in the best and most responsible way. So yes, there's a lot of role for Gen AI, technology, data across the board, and I see more and more discussions that come together in that space.
Right. So sustainability by nature is a global topic, right? So we live one planet and we all have to share one goal. As you said, we need to align in the agenda. On the other hand, you also mentioned we are now in a global environment that is simultaneously connected but also fragmented with some of the war, with some of the geopolitical tension, right? So for firms, if particular multinational firms, if they are navigating different locations, what should they do? Are there any suggestions you would give to firms or managers in this situation?
Stephanie, you're totally right. We deal with one world, and wherever we release carbon in the air, it comes all together. It doesn't care about what the borders or the state borders or the policies are, and so on. And so that's just true for many other topics. Water is a huge topic. Half of the world is water challenged already. It doesn't matter where you are, you find that problem in so many parts of the world. So as a company, I think this sustainability piece here probably relates to many other decisions that you have to make as a company. Where do you use your footprint? Where do you manufacture? What's your supply chain? How do you get optionality into the supply chain? So many of those topics we're going to, similar to my point about sustainability gets integrated into strategy and the operational activities, we will see that integrated supply chain is probably the most prominent one. What's your supply chain? How much geopolitical risk are you taking? Sustainability risk, I mean environmental, also social risk. There are very different worker conditions across the world, and we care more and more about that in a part. What optionality are you building in your supply chain? If you don't get the product from one part of the world, are you going to get it from another part? If big political changes happen, half of the world has voted this year or will be voting, this year, still. So companies need to create more optionality. And that, I think, is a key message, because the last 10, 15 years have been high efficiency, often dedicated supply chains and tune that one. But we've seen that over the last couple of years, when something major happens, disruptions are huge. And so we will see sustainability being one element, more and more optionality that is going to be created.
Wow. So a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities.
Changes are hard, but changes also create the biggest opportunities, the biggest disruptions. And for business leaders, I do think, we know that when change happens, market positions change. Winners get created when disruption happens. They don't get so created when it's all calm and quiet.
Right. So what about talents? You mentioned earlier about human capital, right? So how employees, managers, how do they think about sustainability? How do they embrace sustainability in their day-to-day life, right? So if you were going to give my students some advice who want to enter this space of sustainability, so what talents would the market want, or anything they should get themselves prepared at this point?
So it's a great question, and it just shows how evolving the world is. Probably I would have given you a different answer 2 or 3 years ago than I would give you now on the actual skill side. So but let's start on. I think there's a skill conversation and there's a general aptitude capability in a conversation. So on the skill side, I think having real experience in the domain matters hugely. Yes, you need some general management skills, but to pick an area, and if you wanted to operate in the sustainability space, where are you really deep? Are you deep around water? Are you deep around social? Are you deep around supply chains? Pick an area where you have a real set of expertise that you build out. But then, and probably even more important in the long term, is recognize that the world changes all the time. I just described it. 2 years ago to now is a very different world. So learning, adapting, being flexible matters. But you can't just move around all the time. Companies are successful when they have a core steady path and with some changes to it. And I think that's also true for careers. There's lots to be learned, but if you jump all the time from one topic to the other, you don't get the resilience of seeing things to the end. So being quite practical, I always think about whatever you commit to it for at least 2 years. That's for me a bit of a milestone. If you do things for 6 months this and 6 months that, you never get the resilience, to be actually see some things to the end, and you learn whilst you're actually getting things done. So 2 years is a pretty magical number for me, to be really digging into something to advance your learning.
Yeah, that's a great advice. So today we really need some expert in a certain niche, deep area, right?
Yes.
Particularly with Gen and AI, generative AI. So like the baseline, as you talk about, the knowledge, the data, information has been elevated so much, right? So that we, individuals, we really need to stand out by having like a deep area of expertise, and then be ready to change and embrace change all the time. Cool. Thank you so much, Tom. This is really insightful.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.